everybody. Welcome back to another exciting edition of Ed Puzzle Lecture Notes. Now, today's daily objectives. So, when you leave class today, this is going to be a fairly difficult unit, genetics. But if you don't understand these new terms, these vocabulary terms, you have no chance of passing this unit. Anyway, so when you leave, be able to define the following terms: gene, allele, genotype, phenotype, homozygous, heterozygous / hybrid, those mean the same thing, and what does dominant and recessive mean? Also be able to describe Mendel's 4 principles of genetics. That will probably be a written question eventually when we take our genetics exam. All right, hope you enjoy the lecture. All right, so here we go. Now, like always, the vocabulary of any unit is extremely important because until you understand what these words mean, it's hard to do any of the other problems that we're going to be doing later on. So step 1, let's learn the vocabulary. So the first term is something called heredity. Heredity. Heredity is the passing of physical, mental, or behavioral traits from one generation to another. Now, for example, you can see this basket full of puppies right here. Well, why do they all look similar? Why do they have that same like yellow cream color? Well, look at their parents. Remember, these puppies, they're all going to give half their DNA from their dad, and they're going to get the other half of their DNA from their mom. So those two dogs passed on their genetic traits to their little puppies, and that's why they all look similar. Now, the study of heredity is this unit we're doing right now. It's called genetics. So the study of how traits are passed on from parents to their offspring, that's called genetics. Here you can see this dog, that's the parent, and there's its little puppy. Now obviously they share a lot of the same traits, a lot of the same physical traits. They look the same. You can see they have brown and white faces, but it's also not just the physical traits. You can see that these two dogs actually sleep the same. So they both sleep kind of in a stiff position, and that's also something that could have been passed down, from parent to the offspring. And the last term on this page, any distinguishing quality or characteristic, for example, like hair or eye color, those would all be considered traits. So for these dogs, their traits, they have black nose, they have kind of brown ears, most of them. They have very light color fur. Those are all their traits that they got from their parents. And moving on to some more vocabulary. A segment of DNA which codes for a particular trait. So a segment of DNA which codes for a particular trait, we call that a gene. A gene is a segment of DNA which codes for a particular trait. So you can see over here, here's homologous chromosomes, one from mom, one from dad. They contain the same genes. So right here, this segment of the DNA, this chromosome, has the gene for making eye color. And it'll be the same thing with this chromosome over here. But just because you have the same genes does not mean that you have the next term called alleles. So alleles are the specific forms of genes. So you can see over there on those two chromosomes, this chromosome that they maybe got from dad has the allele to have blue eyes. Where this other chromosome, this other homologous chromosome, it's also the gene for eye color, but this allele is for green eyes. So they got one allele for blue eyes and one allele for green eyes, that individual. And you can see some other genes, some other alleles. So here's the gene for making earwax, and they got both the same allele, so they will make earwax. Here is the gene for the shape of your earlobe. So they have different alleles here. So this one could be like an attached earlobe, and this one could be maybe a free-floating earlobe. You'll see that later on. The next term is dominant. So when it comes to alleles, some are stronger. Some are the stronger form of these genes or alleles. So that'd be like this guy right here. And we always say that a gene is dominant. We show it by putting a capital letter. So this guy right here has got a capital letter. He's the dominant form of the gene or allele. The weaker form of the allele is called the recessive form, and we show that with a lowercase letter. So this would be an example of the recessive allele with the lowercase letter. So remember, we get 2 of each chromosome. We get 2 of each allele, one from mom, one from dad. Well, if you get one dominant allele and one recessive allele, the dominant allele is kind of like the bully. It's going to make you have that specific trait. For example, if you get one allele from your dad to have brown eyes is dominant. And you get an allele from your mom to have blue eyes is recessive. So if you have one brown-eyed allele and one blue-eyed allele, your eye colors are going to be brown. They will not be blue because blue is the weaker or recessive form of the gene. Okay, 2 more very key terms for this unit, genetics. So this one's going to be the combination of genes or alleles that an individual has. So what's your combination of alleles that you have for eye color, hair color, dimples, freckles, whatever? That is called your genotype. Genotype. So what alleles do you have? What letters? That is your genotype. So you can see down here, this flower right here has the genotype, capital B, capital B. And in this case, the B stands for purple flowers. This flower right here has the genotype, lowercase b, or little b, little b. And the little b is the recessive allele for white flowers. So the genotype is your combination of letters or alleles. Now, what you can see, the physical expression of that genotype is called your phenotype. So you can see down here, this purple flower has the genotype, capital B, lowercase b. It has one dominant allele and one recessive allele, but since it has that dominant, capital B, it is going to have purple flowers, just like this flower over here that has 2 dominant alleles. The only way you can have white flowers is to have the genotype, to have 2 recessive alleles, like this flower right here. And if you have 2 recessive, 2 little b's, then you'll have the white flower phenotype. All right, 2 more key terms, or a couple more key terms here. So this is how you're describing an organism's genotype. Its genotype, or its combination of alleles. Well, one term you can use is called homozygous. Homozygous. Now the prefix homo means same. So all of these things, homozygous, true breeding, and pure breeding, all that means is it says that you have 2 of the same alleles. So you can have big R, capital, capital, 2 dominant alleles. That would be homozygous, true breeding, or pure breeding because they're both big. They can also be both lowercase or little letters, recessive. Since they're both the same, they're both little, that would be considered homozygous, true breeding, or pure breeding. So all that means is both of your alleles are the same. Now, obviously, heterozygous or hybrid, that's not going to mean same. That's going to mean you have 2 different alleles that makes up your genotype. So you would not be big R, or little r. You would be big R, or capital R, lowercase r. So that would be heterozygous or hybrid. You have one dominant allele and you have one recessive allele. So you look here down with these sheep, and you can see that having white wool is the recessive phenotype. So the only way you can have white wool is you got to have 2 little b alleles, 2 recessive alleles, or homozygous recessive. Now to have black wool, like this sheep over here, you can have 2 different genotypes. Both of these genotypes right here will give you black wool. You can have 2 big B's, homozygous dominant, or you could be heterozygous, big B, little b. Both of those will give you the black wool. All right, quickly. So one name you're going to need to know here in genetics, basically the only name you're going to need to know, is a guy that's considered the father of modern genetics, and that guy's name is Gregor Mendel. He was an Austrian monk who studied heredity back in the 1860s. So basically during our Civil War, Mendel was studying heredity using mostly pea plants. So he did not have Google, he did not have computers, but he did have pea plants. And he would cross different plants to see what the offspring would be like. So he'd cross different types of pea plants, and then he would look to see how the baby pea plants would turn out. All right, now we'll go over Mendel's 4 basic principles, which you'll need to know. The first one's pretty obvious. It's called Principle of Unit Characteristics. And basically that means that all of your traits, the physical, behavioral traits that make you who you are, skin color, hair color, eye color, whatever, these are passed down from parents to their offspring. And they're passed down through units called genes or alleles. And remember, offspring get one allele from each parent. So you get one allele from mom and you get one allele from your dad. So that's what principle of unit characteristics. Genes are passed down from parents to their offspring, and that's what gives you all of your traits. And Mendel's second principle that he observed by studying pea plants and other plants, he learned that certain alleles are dominant and other alleles are recessive. So it's kind of like this picture over here again. Dominant alleles will mask or hide recessive alleles. Because the dominant alleles, if you have one dominant allele and one recessive allele, you're going to show that dominant trait. For example, right here are dimples. That is a dominant trait. So this guy, in order to have dimples, he could have 2 dimple alleles, big D, or he could also have the genotype. He could get one dimple allele, like say from his mom, and then he could get a no dimple allele from his dad. But since he has that dominant allele, he will have dimples. Same thing with this. This is what's called an unattached earlobe, how it's kind of hanging off the side of the face, where this is an attached earlobe, where the earlobe is directly attached to the side of that person's face. Well, unattached earlobes are dominant. So that would be like a big A for unattached. So that person could have big A will have earlobes that look like this, or they could be big A, little a. Either way, you're going to have unattached earlobes. The only way you have earlobes like this girl over here that are attached, you got to be little a, little a. You got to have 2 weak recessive alleles in order to have those attached earlobes. And same thing with this cat over here. So that fur pattern is a recessive pattern on that tabby cat. So that would have to be little t, little t. You'd have to have 2 little weaker alleles, recessive alleles, in order to have fur that looks like that. And Mendel's third principle is his principle of segregation, which basically means separation. So, remember, in your genotype, you have 2 of each allele. So this one right here is homozygous dominant. It's got 2 capital P's. But when you make your gametes, when you make your sex cells like the sperm and egg, you do not give both of your alleles to your offspring or to your kids. You're going to give one or the other. So during meiosis, your alleles segregate or separate from each other into separate gametes, separate sex cells. So for example, here's big P, little p, heterozygous. So you're not going to give both alleles into your gametes, into your sex cells, the sperm and egg. You're going to give either the big P will go in half of your gametes, and the recessive little p allele will go into the other half. So that's Mendel's principle of segregation or separation, which means you don't give both alleles to your gametes, you don't give both alleles to your offspring. You just give one or the other. And basically the same thing as the previous slide, but remember, in meiosis, so this individuals started out with 2 chromosomes, one blue, one red, but at the end of meiosis, the gametes either got the blue one or they got the red one. They did not get both. And remember, you can see here you had some crossing over on these two right here. So the blue guy got a little bit of red DNA from mom, and the red chromosome from mom got a little bit of blue DNA from dad. But the main thing is your chromosomes will separate or segregate into different gametes during meiosis. And Mendel's fourth and last principle is something he called independent assortment. Now, what this means is not only do your chromosomes segregate or separate from each other during meiosis, but they also separate independently or randomly. So if you remember in metaphase 1, when the homologous chromosomes line up in the middle, well, in this case, you had 2 blue chromosomes on the left and 2 red on the right. And then, so when they made their gametes, these got all blue chromosomes and these got all red. But it doesn't have to work out like that. It's totally random. So on this one, you have a blue and a red on the left and a red and a blue on the right. So now when they made their gametes, now each of the gametes got both a red and a blue. So it's totally random which way these chromosomes or alleles are going to separate from each other during meiosis. So for example, let's say you have dimples and you also have blonde hair. All right, so let's say you have a kid. If your child has blonde hair, that does not mean he or she is also going to have dimples, because those are separate genes on separate chromosomes. They do not stick together. So it's totally random if your kid's going to have dimples or blonde hair, because they're separate genes on different chromosomes. They don't stick together. It's independent assortment. It's totally random which of your traits your kids are going to get. All right, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.